I froze up. I wasn't expecting it to ring, and I was too scared to answer it. What if it was the same person that the pig man had talked to? Or maybe it was someone who could help me, but in my panic state, I just wasn't sure what to do. I hesitated and stood in place too long. By the third ring, I could hear approaching heavy footsteps from someone who must have been wearing boots. I hid under the desk, making myself as small as I could. The light in the room was positioned in a way so that it cast the man's shadow on the nearby wall. Between the phone's rings, I could hear his muffled breathing from under the mask. He sounded agitated, perhaps offended by the interruption. My heart was beating out of my chest. I remained under there, quiet and frozen, as he stood just behind me on the other side of the desk. I believe he was waiting for the phone to stop ringing, but after about a dozen or so rings, I could see his shadow bring up his mask and grab the receiver. "Sleepypines Security," he answered, in that kind of tone of voice I remember my parents using whenever we did something bad. Yet they were still trying really hard not to yell at us just yet. I'm paraphrasing, but he went on to say something like, "Lost child. No one's here. Yes, I'm looking at the cameras right now. You don't need to get the police involved. Your kid isn't here. Goodbye. Don't call back." He then slammed the phone down, and I could hear him mutter out of frustration, "Damn it." Despite my terror, I could still comprehend that it was one of my parents that had just called. They knew I was missing, and it was just a matter of time until either they or the police showed up. I suppose it was also a good thing I didn't pick up the phone, or I would likely have been caught. The pig man slid his mask back down and turned to leave, and I planned to return the call as soon as he was gone. The instant that I began to move, however, the phone rang again, and I retreated back under the desk, only seconds before the pig man came stomping back in. He ripped the phone right off its cord and threw it against the wall with so much force that I could hear the plastic case shatter on impact. His rage only made me even more scared of getting caught. The slightest inconvenience getting in the way of his ritual was like heresy. Worse, he knew there was a child somewhere in the building, a helpless interloper. He and the others would now keep an eye out for me. Recognizing this, I must have stayed under that desk for a decent length of time before mustering the courage to get up and leave the room. With the only phone I could easily get to destroyed, but also armed with the knowledge that help was on the way, I saw my best option as just trying to get out of the building. Sleepypines wasn't at a central location and served many towns, yet it was still a ways from the interstate and the gas station near it. The place was in the middle of nowhere. There were no other businesses I could run to. Even so, by then I was ready to take my chances, waiting or hiding outside. The emergency exit doors out in the hall were also a no-go. Looking back, I think that the mall could be completely locked down by design. Maybe it was important for the ritual that nothing could get in or out. Or it could be that they were looking for something else inside. I haven't mentioned this yet, but ever since getting out of the washing machine that night, I'd felt like I was being watched, as if eyes were on me the moment I'd stepped out into the darkness of the Sears store. I wonder if I had just stayed in the tumbler, would I have been safe? I'm not saying that the mall itself was alive, but I believe there was some kind of presence in there that night, all around. Pervasive, lingering in the shadows, and in every corner where light didn't reach. The feeling was never stronger than when I slipped into the utility corridor, its entrance being right by the useless emergency exit. It was a cold, dirty place, left unheated. Nothing but gray concrete, wiring, air ducts, old equipment, and remnants of stores that had closed over the years. The long stretch of hallway was like the building's unseen museum. Sale signs, going out of business banners, cardboard stands, broken shelving units. I'm not sure what the place that no shopper typically sees are like in your mall, but Here, it was as if management never threw anything away. It was a mess, but at least the flickering fluorescent lights that lined the ceiling kept it from being dark. I'm guessing they were rarely turned off. I never actually got a chance to look for some seldom unused doorway back there. I didn't even take a step past the entrance. The presence I had felt was almost overwhelming from my spot at the end of the hallway. Any kid would have been scared to navigate in normal times, and for one reason in particular. The corridor was breathing. The night still gets worse, but I'm confident that just being in the hall was one of the main reasons my mind locked me out of the surreal memories in the first place. Like the chanting under the skylight, the breathing was rhythmic and natural, in and out, as if I were staring into a huge monster's throat. It was frigid, too, but impossible to mistake for a draft. Wind pulled trash and other loose objects away from me, and then blew them back several seconds later. And yet there was no sound, other than the skittering of small debris affected by the current. No rumbling or snoring, only dead silent, breathing air. I don't remember how long I stood there, debating whether it was safe to turn back or actually proceed into the hallway. Maybe only seconds, but I'm sure it felt longer. My decision was made for me when I suddenly saw a rapidly approaching darkness from the other end. Its movement was swift and never stopped. It wasn't like the fluorescent lights were taking turns shutting off. There was an abysmal blackness coming right at me, at the speed of a train, and it engulfed everything it swept past. I think it may have even generated a shockwave of air, hitting with enough force to push me forward just after I had turned around to flee from whatever entity was threatening to swallow me. I threw my body against the door I had stepped through only moments ago before the darkness could reach me. Then I fell to the floor, stumbled about, and took off in the opposite direction as fast as I could. Keeping it all in was impossible, and I can recall screaming as I ran with no destination in mind. It didn't matter that my panic had given me away, because the pigman was already on the lookout for a child. He grabbed the back of my jacket the instant I passed by a corner where he had been waiting. He was tall and strong. I think he must have picked me up with one arm, by just the collar of my outerwear. He brought me up to his mask, and I could see nothing but black through the rubbery, pig-faced eyes. "Well," he muttered in a guttural growl, "what brings you to Sleepypines tonight, young lady?" Able to hold and carry me with a single arm over his shoulder, like he did the pig carcass, he took me towards the ritual site. My survival instincts kicked in, and remembering what my parents had taught me to do if I should ever get grabbed by a stranger, I started thrashing and yelling in his grip. Not that it did any good against such a brute. I need to take a breath here. I don't feel prepared to move on to what happened after that just yet. It'll take another round of steeling my nerves to revisit the next part. I do want to keep writing while these memories are fresh, so I think I'll spend the next couple of nights doing a little research and getting down some objective facts. Pardon the brief interlude. During its existence from 1973 to 2008, Sleepypines only ever had two owners, the first of which also helped design the building. The second owner was brought in to oversee a revival attempt starting in '91, but didn't quite succeed and ended up closing the mall less than 2 decades later. As far as I can tell, he was a typical businessman of little importance, and his only noteworthy accomplishment was getting a good deal on the sale of the land. So let's instead talk about Pierce Colchester, the first proprietor. I did what I could on digging up information about him before writing the story, but it's no easy task. Whether the world simply ignored him as much as an owner of a mall could be ignored, or he tried his best to bury his tracks, his legacy has been made enigmatic. But there are a few things we do know. He was born in 1942, appeared to be quite tall when compared to others in what few photographs of him exist, and was once a college professor in the Northeast of all things, teaching a class in anthropological studies as they pertain to the native population that once thrived in the area. But that only lasted a short while, and sometime around 1970, he inexplicably came into a lot of money, quit his job, and bought a large tract of wooded land not far from the freshly laid interstate road. His business dealings were seen as shady, and his construction contracts were seemingly lost. But all of that was brushed aside by the local government when Sleepypines opened in 1973 and brought a cash flow into the area that was little more than farmland and abandoned steelworks. I'm certain I met him that night because he suddenly disappeared in 1990, and a new owner had to be found who wasn't as successful with running the place. The mall's reputation was being clean and safe, and that was hit hard. Then it fell into disrepair, vendors evaporated, and its glory days became a memory. In other words, I was there the moment its slow death spiral started. There was something else noticeable about Sleepypines that I gathered from a series of small articles over the years written about the place, stories and observations that never gained wider traction, yet persisted while Mr. Colchester was in charge. Excluding the workers who ran both the corporate stores and the smaller independent outlets, the mall had been knowingly understaffed during his tenure. It did function as any other decent mall, only with far fewer people at the helm than usual, to the point where it was noticeable to anyone looking. It managed to thrive in the early days, even so, and that small overhead must have bolstered the monetary success of Sleepypines and put more money right into Colchester's pocket. He only ever commented directly on the matter once, and never in a written interview. After contacting a few people I grew up with and who still live in the area, one of them managed to uncover an old videotape with recordings of a local news broadcast for the closest city to the mall. It so happened that Colchester was interviewed in 1988, right in the atrium itself and in front of the mural. He had made one of his rare public appearances for what was little more than a fluff piece, celebrating the mall's 15th anniversary, and the segment was less than 2 minutes long. Hearing him speak was what really confirmed to me his identity. He's standoffish, and his answers are to the point, if not a little defensive. I won't transcribe the whole thing, but his responses are worth mention. He is asked 3 questions. To the first, he explains his mall's success on keeping a small but dedicated and professional staff on hand at all times. To them, the place is more than just their livelihood. It's their sanctuary. His words, not mine. Even the reporter seems a little taken aback by his degree of reverence. Perhaps thinking that he went too far, he visibly tries to lighten up a little, emphasizing that he just wants to turn the mall and the work around it into an art form, something to take pride in, like the Italians and the Japanese do. Keep in mind, this is a middling shopping center in a low to middle class rural area. He definitely thinks too highly of himself, and it's clear he isn't much for socializing. Replying to a follow-up question on why he hired so few people, he claims things like efficiency and forming a tight-knit family. I think he just wants to save money and have the right number of workers that he felt he could control, either keeping them devoted to his cause or leaving their numbers small, so they wouldn't consider rebelling against him. After some banter back and forth and compliments from the reporter about the pristine nature of the place, she asks her last question, about the mural. The camera pans over to it, basking in the daylight from the windows above, and because of the low-res video, it's like the figures are watching several children passing by who have ice cream cones on their hands. Every mall needs a centerpiece, something that defines and speaks for it, Colchester says. I've visited many across the country and seen things from elephant sculptures to meaningless displays whipped up by commercial artists. I had this mural commissioned to pay homage to the people who were here first. It allows us to look back at them, and them on us, from the distant past. And for anyone that studies the brushstrokes closely enough, they will find little secrets, depictions of folk stories and forest creatures. I cannot give away the name of its two creators. One did the backdrop, and the other did their depictions of simplistic figures. But suffice it to say, they are both modern masters. All this art talk goes over the reporter's head, and she concludes the interview with a toothy grin and wishes the Colchester luck in the next holiday shopping season. Himself an artist and a backhanded wit, he smiles wryly and suggests that she might wish to check out the sale at the Pottery Barn. She cheerfully closes out, and we return to the newsroom to learn of overly trivial matters. I do miss the simplicity of that time. It's hard to believe that just a couple of years later, the man was covered in blood, wearing a pig mask, and returning to what was pretty much a cult ritual in the mall with me in tow, kicking and screaming. I can really only owe my survival to a rift amongst the workers. Some of them hadn't lost their humanity quite yet, and seeing their boss dragging over a small girl to a sacrificial circle was a step too far for them on first sight. Since I was again near their holy object, I can revisit my reoccurring nightmare realm when my memories are crystal clear. I was finally close enough to the site to see the others, and I took in their appearances despite being terrified. While they never took off their animal masks, the rest of their clothing was also business attire, and I recognized two of the uniforms, that of the custodian and the head of security, both of whom I'd seen earlier in the day. There were two other men in suits, and two women as well that I know I'll never identify. For some reason, when I was brought close enough to the object in the middle of the circle, I could see it. Or, more accurately, I can remember seeing it, since from then on, it doesn't seem to burn a hole in my memory. The totem radiated a strange energy, its structure glowing and containing something exotic and prodigious. There was a red orb floating inside it, giving off waves of heat like a road on a hot summer day. I don't think its color actually had anything to do with blood. Rather, that was just how these delusional people perceived it. Nor do I think they dug it up. It was too clean and intact to be some ancient lost relic found in the area. I can't believe they built it either. I was able to watch Mike and Jenna's video about getting in touch with the person who discovered their camera files and is keeping them otherwise private, making me one of the few who has watched those mall exploration clips. This was definitely not the same totem that briefly appears in the video. Its composition, size, and materials are totally different. Whereas the object they stumbled upon was tall and looked like a wooden carving, this 1990 iteration of the supernatural device was made of bone, bound by leather to wood, and in a shape similar to an antique hourglass, with the bone twisting around the form of a cage of sorts that kept the crimson sphere inside. Thankfully, I doubt it was made of human bones. They looked like they had come from large animals, and I don't think that the people were macabre enough for that kind of defilement. Not yet, at least. Some of their arguments made their opposition to what was happening clear and gave me hope. But that night was already one of the most terrifying things a child could ever experience. Other than Mr. Colchester, the pig man, I can't be sure of who spoke because of the mask, but their quarrel went something like this. "Why is there a kid in the mall? Where did you find her?" "We have to stop everything at once. This isn't part of the process." "But she's already seen too much." "No, we can medicate her, knock her out. She'll think this was all a bad dream. Her parents must already be on their way. Don't waste time deliberating." "But you know, it doesn't let anyone forget." "That's true," Colchester tells his flock, as I continued to stare in awe and fear at their sacred object, "and her family is looking for her. But isn't it obvious what we must do? This is a sign. The divine miracle is testing us, our devotion, by bringing us this lost little lamb. You know what has to be done." "Sir, one of the women replied shakily. When you use language like that, it concerns me. The icon is remarkable, but we need to remain rational and clear-headed. We agreed years ago that it would be dangerous to place such blind faith in this thing that we still don't understand. This remark angered Colchester, and he roared almost incoherently. That is exactly why its power has waned. You never truly believed in the icon. None of you did. Not like I did. How can you take this child's appearance in any other way than a pronouncement? No, a holy commandment. We are never going to sacrifice a child, the other woman says, and she and the custodian get to their feet. This is too much. When does it end? What's next? The custodian asked his boss. Do we put 2 children under the knife next year, then double it every year after that? If we must, Colchester raised on. Think of all the happy families, making memories, buying presents for their loved ones. We need that to persist. This is a small price to pay for success. Open your eyes. But he's only losing followers, and everyone but one of the men in a fancy suit stands up to oppose him. I don't think its power has weakened, sir, the head of security replied harshly. I think that even it can't keep the tide back any longer. He's right, my friend, a man agrees. We can't fight where the market is going. The golden days are over for our businesses, not just us. Let's calm down and talk civilly. There are other uses we can find for the object, and Sleepypines may still be able to sustain itself for years to come, even without its help. The past isn't worth holding on to, not at this price. None of you ever had enough faith in our blessed icon. If you can truly devote yourselves to it, we would not be here tonight. It was then the last person still sitting on the floor, one of the men wearing a business suit and hidden by the rat mask, stood up. He took out the knife from the pig's corpse nearby and wiped the blood off it on his sleeve. My faith is still strong, he grumbled in a harsh tone. Good. Then show me, Colchester demanded, and turned with me still in his grasp so that I could face the large butcher's tool. The man in the rat mask approached callously, like it meant nothing at all to drive that blade into a child's heart if it meant another year in the black. But the others still wouldn't let it stand, and they drew near. They recoiled when the rat man slashed the knife toward them and said sternly, Get back. I have too much riding on this place. If you can't do it, I will. Ever since my mind opened up and confirmed that the memories at the ritual site were real, I found myself wondering the most about the rat man, more so than Pierce Colchester. Who was he? What he had on the line, and why he was the most devoted of all the followers. He must have disappeared too. I think they all did, but the others were just less newsworthy. Whatever his story, the group didn't hesitate a second time, and as soon as he let his guard down, they rushed both him and Colchester and wrestled me from their grip. From the floor I heard them scuffling, maybe even fighting in earnest. It had to have been just the tail end of a long, tumultuous relationship amongst them, and I was merely a passerby in the night. Whatever their boiled-over disagreement with one another, they were more important to the ritual than me. I was the trigger, and also suddenly forgotten for the moment. I could have just gotten to my feet and snuck away, but I was worried that I still might not make it out. That overwhelming presence in the building remained, and if it didn't catch me, then Colchester or the Rat Man would. The two of them were strong and fierce, and in my brief glimpse of their struggle, I saw that they were already close to overwhelming the lesser five. The solution to everything was remarkably simple. If this had happened when I was an adult, I might have overthought it, or doubted my ability to do it. But easy, impulsive solutions are what being a kid is all about. So I did the only thing that made sense to me throughout the night. I got up, went over to the totem, and crushed it with my foot. I furiously stomped on it repeatedly, breaking the bones that comprised it with satisfying snaps. Upon hearing those sounds, and then seeing what I was doing, Colchester expressed his extreme disapproval by flying into another rage. He broke free from the others and came charging at me, but his anger was short-lived and soon turned into some sort of physical or mental anguish. Once the totem was completely shattered, the floating red orb in its center turned black, melted into a liquid that oozed onto the tiles, and then seemingly soaked into them. The substance had disappeared within seconds, and I think this caused a reaction in Colchester. He spasmed and started choking on liquid, black fluid dripping from the pig mask's eyes, and then he vomited up a torrent of that disgusting black gunk from the fountain. The others backed away from him, and I'm guessing they didn't know what was happening either, but he was obviously in pain and suffering as his body tried to purge something unnatural. This was always where my repeated nightmare ended. With Totem destroyed, it no longer had a hold on my memories, and the rest of the night became a blur again, although I now remember the rest just as well as all the other fuzzy childhood accounts. Colchester ran off, clutching his chest or stomach, and there's a chance that everyone else just stood around a moment longer, looking at each other and me as if wondering what now. It didn't last long. Since the mall was dark, the flashing red and blue lights that had suddenly appeared from the outside of the nearest locked door filled the halls and scared them off. After they had disappeared from my life, I ran to the door, feeling overwhelmed by panic and desperate to get out of the building. I'm not sure, but when I destroyed the totem, all of Sleepypines may have trembled. If it wasn't from me severing some otherworldly grip on the place, then perhaps it was just unseen by the omnipresent entity that I felt since I'd started that night. Either way, I had returned to the world of reason and everyday normal adults doing their job. The police officer that had come to my rescue wasn't able to get in touch with any mall staff for some reason, something that was obvious only to me. So after I ran up to the door, they ended up breaking the glass to get me out. My parents were waiting nearby in the van. We had a tearful reunion, and I got back in the vehicle and went home. I only have bits and pieces of these last moments from that night, so it's likely I passed out as the adrenaline dissipated, and they brought me straight to bed. I never told my family everything. They know that I'd been trapped in the mall, alone at night for hours, and that was more than enough to warrant some child therapy. After a few months or so, I must have shown improvement because they no longer saw a reason to keep at it, so long as I didn't visit the mall again. I don't remember much about my sessions, but I don't think I ever told my therapist the full truth. Who would have believed me? What would it add? I'd just be seen as delusional or confusing the resulting nightmares with reality. People in animal masks, worshipping bones and pig blood. While therapy taught me how to manage my emotions and not let past events control me, I mostly credit my recovery to my mind quickly burying the reality of what transpired. I can't explain how it did so exactly, but it could have something to do with the unbelievable things I saw, and part of me just couldn't accept them as real. Or maybe the totem can remove or rewrite memories to disguise its nature and make finding out what it is difficult. In my reoccurring flashbacks and dreams over the decade that take place at the ritual site, the totem itself never actually appeared until recently. I'd forgotten its form. My theory is that the enigmatic object is both a lock and a key. It can hide itself away from perception, but when I read Mike and Jenna's story and saw the videos, the totem unlocked itself within my psyche and freed other memories about that day as well. How it can do this is one more mystery. I think any physical form it takes is tenuous, only as strong as the person that creates it. But it knows how to linger and wait to be made again. I can't even begin to assume everything about its power or its true purpose. I haven't seen any of the people at the ritual site since then, and I never returned to the mall. We did visit my aunt and uncle a couple more times, but I stayed at the house when the others paid a visit to Sleepypines. It had to have been understandable for my parents that I shouldn't need to relive something so traumatic. A few years later, once both of my cousins were adults with their own lives, my aunt and uncle moved away from the small town, and we had no reason to go back. Before I wrote this, I finally asked my mom about her perspective of the night, emphasizing that I remembered everything she thinks happened to me again. It reawakened old guilt, but I assured her that I'd moved on and forgiven everyone for leaving me behind. Her answer gave me a clear understanding of how things went wrong, and I can't really blame my parents anymore, at least not fully. It was an accident, something that could happen to any large group at the end of a busy, chaotic day. It wasn't as basic as driving a van full of kids home and not noticing that I was missing. There was actually some miscommunication between my parents and my aunt and uncle about who was riding with who. Presents filled up both vehicles and meant that passengers had to split up. In the confusion, each driver must have thought that I was in the other car. Specifics about which siblings and cousins were in which vehicle at the time were lost. Not that it really mattered. However things panned out, no one noticed I was missing until a few hours later, when it was time for bed. My parents rushed back to the mall after calling the police, and their response time was such that both parties arrived at just about the same time, despite the difference in distance. Life moved on for us after that, and the incident became just another one of those childhood disasters that big families get used to. All my siblings have horror stories of their own as well, though none as strange as mine. Not that I've divulged to any of them the full truth. I don't believe that the ritual site has ever been discovered, or it was cleared up in a hurry. No local newspapers had a story about anything like that, so I guess they got to keep their secret. However, I did manage to track down the words that the ritualists were chanting after repeating them in my head enough times and thinking about Colchester's reference for the local tribes. They were from the Seneca language, used by the Iroquois people in the area. Yoduj Ade, meaning the earth, and Hahado Ni'i, to breathe. Yodenzadi and Hayodnei. I'm not certain of the pronunciation, and they probably weren't either. They probably didn't have to be. It was the belief that counts, that fed the totem. But if there truly is something special about the land up there, the breathing earth, I wouldn't be surprised. It would track with what I felt and witnessed one night in November. The one last thing I don't understand, to top off so many other things, is that I had to have been in that washing machine for at least several hours, since my mom swears that I didn't go to bed until midnight. There was no way that I would have willingly stayed in there that long, so I must have missing time. I either fell asleep without knowing, totally spaced out for a while, or something else happened the moment the mall closed up that defies explanation. If the totem can screw around with space, it's not a stretch to say that it can screw around with time, too. The danger is great, but I have a feeling that I will eventually be remade again by someone with a different point of view than a few guilt-ridden capitalists in charge of a dying mall. And maybe then we'll get some answers, because I have none. Only guesses, and an outsider's story. Until then, I've recently found that sketching my own version of the totem on occasions is strangely soothing. It makes me feel calm. I kind of like it, and I think it'd look best if created with something artistic, like clay. But I'm also well aware of what it might do if fully realized. So don't worry about me, I'm fine. Everything in moderation. By the way, Home Alone doesn't have a mall scene.
Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's show. If you think you might like a little more spooky in your life, then please feel free to click on one of the videos we have up here. Maybe look at one of the playlists if you're trying to get caught up. I know, there's so many videos on the channel. There's so many series that are going at the same time. Sometimes you just need a little refresher course, and I gotta say, I always enjoy the views. If you're not subscribed, feel free to hit that subscribe button. Maybe hit the bell so you don't miss anything. We upload a lot on this channel, so you won't want to miss a single story as they come out. If you'd like to support the channel, you can click on the Amazon link down there. There's quite a few books in my Amazon account. You can have a look, and if you'd like a signed copy, get up with me through email, and I'll be happy to work something out with you. Also, there's links to my Patreon, and you can become a member on the channel if you'd like your spooky a little bit early. Patrons and members on the $5 tier get their videos 12 hours early. That's in the morning as opposed to in the evening. Patrons at the $10 level also get a signed copy of my book anytime I write one. Speaking of my patrons, you should see them appearing right now. Just wanted to take a minute to say how much I appreciate all of you. Patrons, subscribers, however you give to the channel. I really appreciate everything you do. And it truly touches me that you have chosen to support the channel in this way. Well, that's enough for now. Till next time, Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.